start in a few minutes. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right, so we have our main tag. So let me put them side by side because I want to explain what I'm doing. All right, so this is the version that is almost complete, but we are starting again just so that I can show you what I was doing. Okay, all right, so we have the class container, which will now bring the content to the middle. We'll have equal margin on the left and right. So you do that using the container class, which comes with Bootstrap. And then I want a padding for the content that is inside of the main tag. So I want a padding all round of 4. And then I want to give the whole card a shadow. So that is what these lines of code are doing here. These classes, they're coming from Bootstrap. So Bootstrap will apply the classes, the shadow class, the padding all round of 4, the container. And I want to have a heading. And I want it to style it as a display of 4. So that's why if I check, if you look at this, you can see we have book collection application. So this is the completed one. This is the one we currently have. So you can see it's exactly the same. If I go into the Bootstrap documentation, I just look for display. So the display or heading. Should be somewhere on text. Typography, probably. And then, yeah, it is. So display, you can see we have display 1 all the way to 6. So I'm setting it to a display of 4, but I will show you the difference. If I say I want a display of 6, becomes smaller. I say I want 4, becomes bigger. So 1 is the largest. 4 looks like the sweet spot. So you can already see we have the card. The next thing we need to do is we need to have the horizontal line, right? Just before the next section. So I can come down here. Have a section tag. Then I can have my horizontal line. Okay. Now let's look and see whether it's been applied. It's right here. We can see the line is here. Then the next step is we have the H2. So let me take this, copy it on here. Then for now, I'll not put this alert. I want to show you why I'm putting it here. So I'll do it later. So for now, I will not include the alert. So I'll take the form just as it is, take all of it, paste it into my section. Okay. Make sure it has reflected. There it is. So even the styling for the form, some of the inputs, they're coming from Bootstrap. Because now if I go into Bootstrap documentation, I look for form, you can see we have styling for forms right here. Okay, so that's it for the form. The form is done. And then the button is down here. I did this for a reason. I'm displaying a grid. So I'm wrapping the button in a grid. And the reason I'm doing this is because from Bootstrap 5, you cannot just have, the button will not span the whole width unless you put it in a container. So that's why I put it around a div. And then I gave the div a display of grid. If I remove this, the button will not span the whole width. But I want it to span the whole width. So I wrap it in a div. Now it spans the whole width. So the styling is also coming from Bootstrap. So you see, when you say you want a class of BTN, some styles that are applied, then BTN-dark, which is the color, I can have primary, give it a different color. I can have secondary, give it a different color. I can have danger, which would give it red, and so forth and so forth. Again, all this is in the documentation here, Bootstrap. You can just go through it and you'll see all these things. So even the hovers, they're being applied because we have the BTN class. So when you hover, it becomes slightly like grayed out. So that's it for the form and this section. So what's remaining is the table. Look at my finished version, you can see we have the table down here. So let's do that. Let's add the table. Again, go back into my code. I take the table section from here all the way to this point. Paste it in. Right after the form, we have the table. So again, even for the table, you can find the styling, anything that you want from the documentation. If I just look for a table, we'll find all the styling for that. There it is, how to define a table. You can have different colors for the table. You can have dark, light, info, warning. So I can just come here and change the color. For example, warning. Give my table that yellowish color. You can see right here. I can have it as a striped table, which is what I had, which means zitakuwa zinakaa hivi, whereby one of the columns looks more grayed out than the other. So I just had here and I have it as a striped instead, a striped table. Back and it goes back to the way it was. And that is it for the UI. We are done. There's nothing else we need to add. Anybody with a query about Bootstrap? I don't know, nowadays it's not as popular as it used to be before. It used to be very popular before Tailwind, but it's still just as good. Anybody with a query? We proceed. Is the code making sense? Umeelewa kabisa markup. Okay. Right, so that's it for the UI. That's it for the styling and everything. Okay, so now let's go into the functionality now. Okay, so now we have our script tag from Bootstrap here. And right below it, we need to have our own script tag. Source JS. Okay, all right, so if I go into my JS file, it is empty. Let's test it out. Let's make sure it's working. Loaded. Make sure it's running. Open the terminal. Index.html. We have an issue called the HTML file. 51. Yeah, I don't know why it was. Oh, that was before when it was saving before I finished typing. So the script is loading. It's smaller. So the script is loading. We can see it. All right. So now we need to start working through the code now. Right. So let's think about what we're trying to do. So we can see that our book has a title, an author, and an ISBN, right? So now that already, because we know those fields will always be the same, we can use that to create an object, right? That means every time we create a new book, we need to instantiate, we need to create a new book object. So first of all, the way I'll do it, we'll first of all start with ES5 syntax. So we'll do functions first. Then we will now remake the application or change the code to now use classes afterwards. Because I want you guys to have both views. You can have an example of both of them, classes and functions. So the first thing we need to do is create a constructor for books, right? Let's do that. So function book. The book takes in title, the book takes in an author, and the book takes in an ISBN. So this is my first constructor. So book constructor. And then I want to have another constructor whose work is to control the UI. So anytime I add a new book to the UI, I want to use a UI constructor. Anything that has to do with the user interface. When I delete something, when I add a book, when I want to show an alert, I want to use a constructor. So I'll create another constructor for UI, the UI constructor. So I'll simply give it a function, call it UI controller. And then this one will not take in anything. We will not take in any parameters. We won't take in any properties. So it's just an empty constructor. And that is because I don't want to have properties being displayed. I don't want to like come here and declare, for example, a method here like this dot, for example, add book. Then I set it to a function. I don't want to do that here. I want to set the methods. So any method that I'm going to use, I'm going to put it in the prototype. I'm not going to put it in the main function. I'll put them in the prototype because I don't want to populate my original object. So I have my two constructors, one for the book, one for the UI controller. So now we can come here and do the normal this dot. Title is equals to title. This dot author is equals to author. This dot ISBN is equals to ISBN. So that's it. We have two constructors. The next thing, just based off of just looking at the functionality, what do we need to do? We need to add event listeners. We only need one event listener initially for the submit. If we look at my code, my markup, you can see my form, which is right here as an ID of form, and my button is a submit button. So if I press enter, if I click the button, it will submit the form. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is add event listeners. Okay. So we want to add an event listener on the form. So we need to get the form from the DOM. Okay, so now we need to say const form element is equals to document dot. I don't want to use get element by ID. I want to use query selector. We know the form has an ID of form, right? So let's test that out. Let's see whether form element will be logged in the console. There it is. We have the form. So now we need to add an event listener for it. So form element dot add event listener. We want to listen for a submit, and we want to call the callback function. Again, I'm not using arrow functions because we'll cover arrow functions when we talk about ES6. I'm not using arrow functions. Okay, so we are going to have a submit event, and then when that event is triggered, we want to call the callback function. We want to pass in the event argument, and then we say e.prevent default, so that we don't have the refresh and we don't submit. Nataka kuona the response in the UI. So let's test that out. Form submitted. Okay, so now let's test it out. So if I click on this, we should get a form submitted on the console. There it is. So our event listener is working. We have successfully set up the event listener on the form, so we are good to go. Right, so what do you think the next step should be? So we have the form, right? What is the next step? So when we submit, what do we want to do? Who can help me out? What do you think we should do next? Anybody with a suggestion of what we should do next? Try to come up with a logic for like a logic that works. Anyone? What should we go with first? Any questions up to that point?
Okay, I don't know if I'm right, but can I say first you need to get the values from the input fields?
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. So we need to get the values from the input fields. Good. So now what do we need to do? We need to declare variables, right? Hold those values, right? So const title, it should be equal to document preselector. I gave that input an ID of title. And we'll check the markup. Check the markup. Let's go to that input field. It's right here. You can see it has an ID of title. Okay, so we want to get that as well as everything else, the author, the ISBN, right? Okay, so now let's do that. Let me just copy this. Bunch of times, just twice. We want one for author, and we want one for ISBN. Then we want to change this to author. Want to change this to ISBN. I wrote it in capital. Confirm. Have an ID of author here, and we have an ID of ISBN here. So that is okay. So now we are getting there, the values. We want the values because what we've currently done, we've just gotten the elements, not the values, just the elements.
You're going to add dot value at the end, right?
Okay, yes. So we add dot value at the end because we want the actual values. We don't want the elements value. So now this will give us anything that we write into the inputs. That's the next step. All right, now we have the form values. Who can tell me what is the next step? What do we do next? We have the values. What do we do next? Let's confirm with just one of them before we continue. Title. So we want to log the title. Okay, so let's do that. Let's just put anything here. You can see it right here. Okay, it's right here. Sasa, let's do something here. Now, if I try to submit the form, if I try to submit the form with no values, it still submits, right? It still submits. So now we have the values. We need to check, to do some error checking. We need to make sure that all the fields have values. What do we do now? How can we control that information? How can we control and only tell the application only submit or only create something when we have all the fields present? What do we do? How do we handle that? Anybody?
Can we use an if else so that if the user submits an empty value, it returns an error? But if they input the correct value, it returns the result that they're looking for.
Yes, good. So we use an if statement, an if else. So if, what do we write here? If, what are we checking for? So there's a bunch of ways to implement this, but I'm going to use the negation. If no title, if I don't have a title, right? if the user has not input a title or an author or an ISBN. If either of them is missing, then don't submit, don't try to do anything afterwards, just log an error, which is what you're going to do for now. So console.log, need to provide all fields. So when we don't have all of them, it will log out this. When we do, then we want to submit. Okay. Okay, so let's test it out. If I try to submit the form without the values, you need to provide all the fields. If I write just one, I get the error again. If I have just two, I still get the error. If I have all of them, then it submits. So our error is working, our error checking is working. We are validating properly. Okay, so good. Thanks, Catherine. So that works. All right, so now we have successfully checked and made sure that all the fields are there. What is the next step? What do we do next? What do you want to do next?
Okay, just to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
What if you type like a space instead of a letter? Will it consider a space like a value, or will it consider like it's just null?
If you type in a space in the fields.
In the input field, yeah.
In the fields here. Okay, so if when a space, I'm not seeing anything. So just say submitted. Let's put spaces. Again, this is like this is like an edge case, because there's absolutely no way someone is going to like write spaces. But again, you always need to handle all the errors. So you can see it's submitting. So what do we need to change here? Because we need to change something here.
Yeah, I can suggest.
Mm-hmm.
I guess okay, there's a trim method in that is used on strings to trim the spaces.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can use that to trim the spaces from the title, author, and ISBN before submitting it.
Mm-hmm.
But
So
yeah,
we
that was the
trim
idea.
at what point? We trim at what point? Do we trim at this point, or do we trim at this point? Where do we trim?
Okay, you can just try and trim on the if statement, like if not title dot trim, similar to author, similar to SBN. Maybe you can try it that way first.
Mm-hmm. So we try it on all of them. Mm-hmm. Then on this one as well. Okay. Let's try. Let's see whether that works. So what does the trim do? Just for clarification, what does the trim method do?
The trim method removes the spaces, the empty spaces between some words. Maybe on the beginning and the end, yeah, but not at the middle.
Yeah, okay, so it's working now. When you use the trim, it is working. It's correctly, it's not passing in it's validating correctly. You need to provide all the fields. So thank you, that's a nice suggestion. Okay, so we are done with validation. What is the next step? Now, in the else block, we have all the values. What do we do next? Suggestions, anyone? What do you think we should do next? Anyone with a suggestion?
Maybe you could have an array of books. You could have an array of books and then just push the books as objects when they're submitted.
Okay, so we have an array of books. So where are we getting the array of books from? Where are we getting it from?
Like we create it. so that like we are placed first to start those books as we add them.
Okay, very good suggestion. Before we implement that, anyone else?
Yeah, can I say now it's time maybe you can call the constructor now that you can pass in the value, the book constructor now.
Okay.
Like now you create an instance of now a new book, like const.
Okay.
Let's say book one is equals to or book is equals to now we call the constructor new. Is it new book, something of that range?
Okay. All right. So Joseph, that was a very good suggestion. But like what Nelson said is what we need to do now. Because we have all the fields, we know that we have a title, we know that we have an author, and we know that we have an ISBN. So now we need to instantiate the book constructor and pass in those values. So const book is equals to new book, and then you now pass in the fields. So we want the title, we want the author, and we want the ISBN. Because at this point, we are sure we have all the values. So we can now instantiate the object. Then the next step is we now need to log the book. Let's just make sure it's actually creating a book object. So let's try to do it without any values. Fine, we are getting the correct error message in the console. We just try something random. We have the book. It's creating the book. Let me actually just write an actual book. Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Then 4545. So we are creating the book object right here. Good. Okay. So now, what is the next step? We have the book object, right? So now, because we know it exists, we have that object in our code. We now need to add it to the UI. So now this is where we now use our constructor for the UI. So the UI controller is only supposed to handle anything that does with the UI, anything to do with the UI, alert messages, adding books to the table, or anything of that sort. Anything that has to do with the UI, we want to use the UI controller. The UI controller doesn't take in any properties because all the methods you're going to use for the UI controller tutaziweka kwa the prototype, not on the actual object. You put it in the prototype. So the way to do that is you use your UI controller. So the name dot prototype dot add book to UI. Okay, we set that to a function. So we are storing this add book to UI in the prototype so that every other book will have this add book to the UI as a prototype method. It's not on the actual UI controller, which is empty because we are not passing in any properties for that object. Doesn't need any, but we do need the methods for it. And then our book to UI can take in the book an argument. So let's see whether this works. So let's log the book. Okay. Now, we know that anytime you use constructors, you need to instantiate it. So you need to use the new keyword. Okay. Now, I want to have error messages as well. So I also want to have a controller for error messages dot prototype dot alerts, not error messages, alerts. And I can set that to a function. And then I can simply console log, for example, this is an alert. Okay, so now this, you need to provide all the fields. We can now replace this console log with this alert message because every time we add a book and the user has not passed in all the fields, we want to have an alert up for the UI that says you have not provided all the fields. Okay, so I want to instantiate the UI controller, but I want to instantiate it outside of the if statement and the else statement. Because if I don't do that, I'll have to instantiate it here. I'll have to say const UI is equal to new UI controller. I don't put it here, I'd have to do it twice. I'd have to do it here. I'd have to do it up and down in the first if block. And then also do it here when I want to have a different alert. So to avoid that, I just put it right here, upper Jew. So that now it's accessible to the if and the else. So now when we don't have all the fields passed, I can simply call UI dot alerts. Okay, so when we don't have all the fields passed, I want to have an alert. Okay, so that should work. If I now just try to do it, you can see this is an alert. Okay, now we can do something else. Okay, we're still doing, first of all, dealing with the alerts and the UI. So this function can take in an argument that tells it whether the alert is an error or the alert is like a success message. The book was successfully saved. So we can pass in an alert type right here. And then based off of what we get from the alert type, right, we log two different things. So let's do that. So if alert type is equal to a success, then we want to say book added successfully. Else, we want to say you need to provide all the fields. Okay. So now let's try. Now, when we know for a fact, right, that we don't have all the fields passed in, we know this should not be, it should not be a success, right? This should be an error message. So I can simply pass in error. Then when we have the book with everything, with all the fields, I can simply call the UI alerts again with a success. So let's try. So when I don't give it anything, you can see it's giving me this. You need to provide all the fields. If I come and give it all the properties, all the field values, you can see book added successfully plus the book object. Is it making sense up to that point? Anyone with a question? Any questions or a comment? Something I need to clarify? I thought someone is saying something.
The UI, could you go over again the UI controller and constructor? It's a bit confusing.
This part.
Yeah.
This
That whole function.
This function. Okay,
All of
the alert
it.
function. Okay. Okay. So
Not just
the
alert function, also the other function, everything under the UI constructor.
Okay, so including the add to book UI.
Yes.
Right. So we have, so the UI controller has one job, and the UI controller is supposed to control anything that has to do with the UI, but it doesn't take any properties, but it does take in methods, right? Some functionality that it needs to do to manipulate the UI. So instead of coming here and saying this dot, right, add book to UI, and then setting it to a function, what we can do, or what we should do, is set all the methods that we know are not going to change. They'll always, you can put those in the prototype, because you don't want to populate the initial object. So for example, hapa, when we create a book, let me use the book example. When we create a book, right, everything that we need, so the title, the author, the ISBN, they're all available as properties of that object. Okay. Now, if I wanted to have a function for the book to do something like reading or something, there's two ways of doing it. You can either come here and say this dot reading, set that to a function that return reading. Okay. And now when you want to use it, you would simply say book dot reading and call it, right? Now, let me instantiate that object. Let me just create it so that I show you what I mean by, I don't want to populate the original object. I want to put all my methods in the prototype. Add it. Now, if you come here, you can see my original object. My object has the author, the ISBN, and the reading function. But I don't want this here. I want it in the prototype here, ukundani. So the way to do it is, instead of defining it hapa juu, right here, define it by saying book dot prototype, and then you set it to that function. So if I do that, if I say book dot prototype dot reading equal to a function, right, and then I return reading. Now, if I create another object, if I open this up, you can see the reading method is not here. It's not here now. Iko kwa the prototype, ndio hii hapa. So I don't want to pollute this with functionality that is going to remain the same for all the objects. So I put it kwa the prototype. So that is what I'm doing when I come down here sasa, hapa kwa the UI constructor, right? Because the constructor is not going to take in any properties, right? So instead, I first of all have the declaration for the function, and then I set all the methods that I want to use in the prototype of the UI controller. So UI controller dot prototype dot add book to UI, set that to a function. That function takes in a book. Then I just want to console log the book. Any questions, Pakapo, this functionality? Catherine?
Yes, so just to get some clarification, this constructor, is it simply here to accept properties that will not change at all?
Yes,
so,
this constructor here.
Yes, so the constructor that's above is for properties that will change, that can change over time, but this other constructor is just for properties that will not change at all.
Yes, for functionality that will not change, basically. Okay. And since the object itself, the UI controller doesn't need any parameter, doesn't need any properties, doesn't need any key value pairs. It simply needs the methods to, for example, update the UI. So we don't need any properties on the UI controller. So does the functionality now, what I'm doing right here, is it making a bit more sense?
It is a bit.
It's confusing.
Yeah, it's confusing because now I'm looking at it from the end user's perspective. What is it? So you just scroll up a bit. Yeah?
Okay. Okay.
I just want to look at that constructor. So yeah, so these are the properties that will be changing over time. And then the UI controller is just to make sure that just to control, you know, aspects that don't need to change, even from the end user's point of view, right?
Yeah. So we are only constructing it because I need to be able to like have access the .prototype. So I do need to have it as a constructor. So just by doing this, right, I've now, and then when I use the new keyword, I can now use UI controller.prototype.add book to UI. That method that only controls the UI in terms of adding a book. Right? And then I can have another one for alerts. So if I come here and let me console log that UI. When I submit, I don't even need to put in everything to just show it. Here it is. So you can see when I use the new UI controller, I've created that instance, right? That object, but there's nothing, there's no properties. So naona hakuna kitu. But if I check the prototype, I can see those methods. I have a method for adding a book to the UI, and I have a method for alerts. So, and then now for the alerts, right? So this UI controller takes in a book, a book parameter. We pass down a book. And that book, right? That book, we want to use it to populate the UI because we need book.title, we need book.author, and we need book.isbn. So we pass it down. We pass it down to the UI controller, to the method. So now this alerts. This is simply for alerting. Anytime we want to alert something here in the page, like this one, like my example, the one that I'm always done with. This alert, right? This alert will change depending on whether the user has input everything or not. If I put in everything there, in anything here, and then anything here, you can see the alert has changed. It now has a green background, and the message has also changed. So that's what we are doing with the alerts. If the alert type, so when the user has not input all the fields correctly, we want to pass in an error argument, right? And then the functionality for the function is if the alert type, if whatever the user has passed in here, like this error, if the alert type is not a success, if it's not equal to success, and you want to log, you need to provide all the fields. If it is success, then we want to log in, the book was added successfully, depending on what we have here as passed in as an argument. So when the user has not input everything, then we need to pass in the error as an argument. So that when it comes here to check the logic, it knows that whatever the user passed down is not a success. So we also obviously need to log, you need to provide all the fields because it's not a success argument. When it is a success argument, so when the user has passed in everything and we have created a book, then you want to say book added successfully. Making a bit more sense. Might need some time here to go through the code. But is it clear what like the two functions are doing?
It is. Then I guess then the purpose of this the UI constructor is to abstract, you know, to remove complexity from the code that will be changing often.
Yes.
Just to put it simply.
But, yes, right? You can say that. Yes.
Okay.
You can say that, but also it's still part of. I'm also trying to show you how you can use OOP, because there's a bunch of ways you can implement this without using constructors. Just to show you how you can do it using object-oriented, I implemented it this way. So this is not the only way to implement it. So I think we can continue. Anybody else with a question or a comment? Ama imepotea? Anything I need to clarify? Okay. So we know that when we pass in all the fields, we create a new book. And then we have the alert for success. So here, properly, 4545, and then book added successfully because we passed in the success argument instead of the error. So it's giving us book added successfully because we checked the alert type. And then now logs the book, which is this thing here with all the fields. Okay, all right, so now once we are done with that, okay, let me just comment this out. So we've created the book instance, right? We now need to add it to the UI. Remember our UI controller, the add book to UI takes in a book. Takes in a book. Now, whatever comes down here is what you're going to use to populate the table. So now let me do that. So we know the UI has been instantiated right here. So now let's use the add to book method, add book to UI method, to pass down that book that we created, that book object, down to that UI controller. So UI dot add book to UI. What does it take? It takes in a book. It's this thing we created here. So now when we call this function, when we call this method, right, based on the implementation, we need to log out the book. The book is whatever came down as a parameter. And when we now we invoke the function here, we're passing in the newly created book object. Okay, so initially we are console logging book directly, like from this variable, but now we want to console log it, but from the function. Kutoka kwa hii function ya add book to UI. So let's try. So to type in the whole thing. Yes. So now you can see it's still logging the whole book object, but if you check, the log is coming from line 15. Line 15 is this one here. So it's working. We have successfully passed the book down to this controller. So when we created it, we now pass it to this controller, this method, then we log it out. So now we need to add it to the UI. We need to add the book to the UI. We need to add it hapa for the UI. Okay, so let's do that now. So we know we have a book. We know we have the object coming down. We know it's there. Now let's go back to our markup. We know if I come down here, I can see in my table, right? I have obviously the table head, which is the title, the author, and the ISBN, right? So this section, hapa, this is the table head. And then I have a table body. This table body is where my content will now go. So if I was to hard code it right now, hapa, we need a table row like this, and this table row needs table data. So we can say to kill a mockingbird. You can see it's on the title, iko hapa kwa title. Then if I want now the author, I can now do that as well. We want have Hapali, and then we want the ISBN to be 34, something like that. So we see we have, this is what we want to have, but we don't want to hard code it. It needs to be dynamic. Okay, this information needs to come from the book object because we are passing the book object down. So we delete this. So this is the markup we want to have, right? So I will actually just comment it out so that we have that reference. Now, what is the first step that we need to do? We have the book object, but now we need to add the values dynamically. Okay, so step number one, right? We need to get this section, the table body. We need to get this table body, and you can see it has an ID of table body. So I can come here and say, const table body is equal to document. We don't want to create an element. Dot query selector. We want to get an item that has an ID of table dash body. I think I call it dash body. Yes. Okay. Okay. Now again, let's console log it. I always like console logging. Ndio tuende tukiona nini inafanyika. So CL table. Now let me comment this out. See that one thing. Okay. So now when we call the add to book UI, we want to see that table body. We want to see that element. So let's try TED. There it is. You can see the element. We got the element. It's right here. So we know we already have that element. The next thing we need to do, right, based off of my markup, when I did it hard coded, the next thing we need to have a TR, a table row element. So we can create that using JavaScript. We can say const TR is equal to document of create element TR. Okay, so we've created the table row. The next thing is we need to set the inner HTML of that table row. Use backticks because you're going to be using variables. The first table data needs to be the title. The second needs to be the author. The third needs to be the ISBN. So TD, then we pass in the book. Remember the book object that's coming down, dot title. Let's copy this 3 more times. We want the author. And we want the ISBN. Now our table row has these TDs, whatever we are doing here, as the inner HTML. This is what it has now. We have the table row, and then within the table row, we have this inner HTML. Then the last step, because we know the table body is going to be the parent of the table row, we can append the table row as a child to the table body. So we can say table body dot append child. The child we want to append is the table row, because the table row has all our information. It has the title, the author, the ISBN, pamoja na the TR element. So essentially what we've done, we've just added this section here, but now dynamically. We've simply added this section here, the one that I've commented out, but now we've done it dynamically. Okay, so now let's try and see what happens. So here, bad 3767. There we go. Let's add another one. We can already see there's an issue. So for me to add another one, I need to either delete them one by one. So we can say Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling. It's working. It's adding the books to the UI. Okay, any questions? I feel like I've been talking for a very long time. Any questions? Is there anything I need to go through again? Is this section for the UI controller, the functionality, is it making sense? Is it making sense what we are doing here? Anyone? Is there mali mnachanganikiwa?
Clarification on the UI controller section. So what the prototype is basically doing is that it's exposing the objects that we defined initially to this UI controller, right?
Yes. So the reason we need to instantiate it, right? The reason lazima tukuje hapa chini tuseme new UI controller is because we cannot get this add to book UI, right, without instantiating it. So this method, hii method add book to UI, it's not a global thing. Haiko, you cannot access it in any other way other than via the UI controller object, that constructor. Because we could have implemented this, we could not, si lazima tukuwe na hii add book to UI hapa as a prototype. We could pass it in directly as a method hapa ndani. But best practice is all your methods zako zote zenye you think, zenye you know, the functionality does not change. They always take in something from either the properties or somewhere else. So it's not something that changes all the time. The functionality for add to book does not change, it's static. So there's no reason why we should put it pale juu kwa the properties. Sababu haitawahi badilika. The functionality is always going to be the same. So you put it in the prototype. That's a nice question. Hapa kwa the functionality is, kuna mtu amepotea mahali hapa section.
Okay, not just a question, but just a little concern. I just want to know something. Why is it that most people do prefer using query selector rather than using the get element by ID?
It's because I think they return different things, if I'm not wrong, except I think class, get element by class name, it's actually classes. It returns, I think, a node list. So you'd have to you'd have to come here, useme fanye hivi, alafu useme like 0. If you're using class, get element by class name. ID will still work, by the way. I don't think ID gives us a difference. So nikikuja hapa niseme get element by ID, it should do the same thing. I should not have any issues. Let me console log it to make sure. Let's see, nataka ingine huko juu. Go back to the selector. Let's go to the other one. This one. Yeah, let's console log this form element. And instead, let's use get element by ID. Let's remove the hash symbol. So this one haina tofauti. Get element by ID doesn't have a difference. It still returns the same thing. If I try to see, it's still working. So hii haina shida. Now, when you come to by class name will give you, I think, a node list. Haitakurudishia kitu moja. It won't return just the one element. Actually, elements. So you see, it's elements. So it's multiple stuff. It's actually a collection, not a node list. So now, on top of getting the element, because you know it's something that looks like an array, you will also have to, did it even get anything? It didn't, because hakuna kitu iko na class name ya form. So ikupata kitu. If it did find it, you now have to come here and put this and then get the first one. So this is one of the reasons in terms of get element by class name, mbona itumikangi sana. Alafu pia query selector is very flexible. You can use it for anything, for tag names, for IDs, anything. You can use it to get anything. based off of anything, the name lazima ikuwe to ID ama class. I think that's why most people prefer it. Yeah, so I think that's the answer to that question, because I rarely knew to hizo zingine, because for selector just works. Because if you wanted to instead get the element by the input, you would do that. If you want to use the input and the attribute or any other thing, you can do that. If you want an input that is a type number, input type element, you can just pass it in here. It's very flexible. Right. Anybody else? Today imekuwa ngumu. Is this stuff making sense? Making sense how we've gotten to this point. Again, I don't expect like you guys to get it in one day, but the logic should like flow. The syntax might look weird, some of the things we've done might look weird, but the logic should be making sense. Joseph, you have anything to say?
Maybe like how, just to ask, how do you plan like to implement that other logic for deleting, like without having some sort of like array or something, and then like the books having an ID?
Yeah, I'll use event delegation. So I'll walk you through how we'll do it. What we'll do, we'll listen for a click event on the parents. So when we add, you get it. When it come up,
I know event delegation, but now you'll use like the remove. You'll just physically remove the HTML elements from the document, or what's the plan?
From the DOM. Yes, I'll remove it from the DOM. So when I'll have an icon here I could delete. I actually already have it here. So when I click this, right, it's going to check whether the element that was clicked has a class of delete. If it does, I'm going to delete the parent of the parent. So nitatoa hii kitu yote. The parent of this icon, the first parent of this icon is the TD. The TD is the first parent, right? If I was to come here and do like a TD, then TD, right? And then I have an X icon here. So to represent this one, what I would do, I'd listen for a click event. When I hear the click event, right? Sasa, I'll target this particular element. Then when I click on it, right, I look and check whether that element has a class of delete. If it does, I want to delete the parent. So the first parent is this of the parent. So the next parent is the TR. So itatoa this whole row because I've targeted, I've done, what is it called? DOM traversal. I've come from mtoto wa huyu, gone to the parent, and then gone to the parent of that, then taitoa yote. That should remove it from the UI.
Oh, like we don't need to like. I was thinking on it like in the perspective of maybe we don't care about the data, in short.
We don't care about the data. We don't. We just want to delete that section. That whole table row. Yeah. So that's why tunaifanya hivyo.
Okay. If you don't care about the data, I get like the approach.
Yeah. That's a nice question. Anyone else? Because we've done like most of the functionality. Okay. So now with our current implementation, right? Every time we write a book, Harry Potter is small. Every time we have a book, we can see these fields are remaining here as itoki hapa. So if your user wants to add a new book, you would have to delete one by one. So we want to add a method on the UI controller that will clear the fields. So based off of this implementation hapa juu, right? How would we add a method to clear the fields and call it at a particular point? How do we go about that? Because we want every time the user amemaliza submit, the fields need to go back to being blank. How do we do that? Yeah, clear fields method. Anybody with a suggestion? I can write like the initial markup. So UI controller dot prototype dot fields, set that to a function. So I've done that bit. So what do we put in here as the functionality? What do we need to happen? How do we clear the fields? Anybody? Does anyone want to have a go at it?
Could I contribute maybe?
Yeah, go ahead, no problem, go ahead.
I think you'll have to select the elements again. That is the input elements, the title. You'd have to select the 3 input elements and set their values to an empty string.
Okay, so let's do that. Take the one for title. Let's take the one for author. Let's take the one for ISBN.
And then
you said we set the value to
an empty string.
Okay, good. And then at what points do we call that clear fields in our implementation? Where do we call it? Do we call it here? Do we call it huku chini? Where do we call it? We call it from somewhere. Anyone?
After adding the book to the UI.
So here.
Yeah.
Whether that works. So it's working. So after you add the book, you clear the fields. So that's working. That functionality is fine. Anyone with a question as to how that happened? Albert, thank you. That was the correct answer. We don't even need to assign them to variables because hatuwezi tena. We just want to clear the fields, the input. There's nothing else we want to do. So we can just do it this way directly. Just get the elements, clear the values. So, okay, so what is left? We need an alert. We need an alert, and we need the icon. We need this icon, this one. So that icon, we can get it from Font Awesome. So let me see, I already copied the CDN in the other project. I want Font Awesome. It should be the one. I'll include it in my HTML, but I have access to those icons. It right here, and then check the icon. Awesome. We want, I think it's called a trash icon. There it is. So this is what we want. We want this icon. So I can just take this, the way it is, come to my JS. When we are doing the TDs, when we are adding the table data, the table right here, I can simply add another one here. D, and I want it to be a link that we'll be able to hover over it. With a href, nothing, and give it that icon. Okay, so let's see. So add a book. Add author. Okay. Okay. Why did it not show up?
You missed the closing. Yeah, after the href, you missed the closing.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So you can see our icon is now here. So if I add another book, and added. Sawa mpaka hapo. Anybody with a question? Someone wants to say something.
Yeah. Why are you using an anchor link instead of a button?
Actually, for no reason. That's just the implementation I was going for.
Oh, okay.
Because you can still use a button. It doesn't make a difference what I use. Yeah. Anyone else? I need to clarify. So there's some functionality that is left. For example, adding the alerts. We don't still have the alerts for when we submit a book without anything, or when we successfully submit a book, and we need those. I think we can implement those before we end. So when the book is added successfully, we want to have an alert that says the book was added successfully. So Bootstrap gives us alerts. You can just scroll down. Let's look for. Let's take this one. It's pretty easy enough. But then, so at this point, now let me go back to my HTML. I want the alert to come between this add new book and the title hapa, inafaa kuja hapa. So what I can do, there's a bunch of ways to implement it, but the easiest way is I can come right here to where I have this, I have an empty div, all this alert, because there's nothing inside of it. And when I use this, now the success or the error, now at this point, I want to find that element. So because I know I'm going to use it in both, I can simply say const container is equal to document dot query selector, and I want the ID of alert. I want that element Then I want to say this book added successfully. So alert container dot inner HTML is equal to, okay, we need practice because this is just, there's no, I'm not passing any variables in. I want this. Okay, we do need practice. Something is wrong. I do need practice because for me to be able to pass in the divs also. Now I want to change the message to this. I want to delete every other thing that I'm not using. So text ingine yote. Need this. I don't want it to be a warning. I want it to be a success message. So this will change the color of the alert. Then when I have an error, right, I'm going to have something different. I want this to not be success, but danger. Danger will give us a red color. And then I want to take this code, sit in here instead, and delete this console log right here. And pick this one as well. So now we have two divs. This one has a different color and a different message from this one. Alert danger and alert success. So let's try and see whether it works. It works because at this point, this is what is being put inside of the alert container where we have the danger. This will dismiss it. If I put in everything, book added successfully. Anybody with a question? This part making sense, how we are doing it, getting the alert from the DOM, getting this container, and simply adding that div, simply adding this alert within it. It's the same as taking this code and then putting it directly up and down. Now we are doing it dynamically because we don't want it, sorry, we don't want it to have it by default. We only want it to show up when we have a message to show, when we have an alert message. You can see by default, this is when I do it, I just hard code it, but we don't want that, obviously. We only want it to show up when we have an alert message. Right. What else is here? Let's see. Pauline, any question?
Not really. It's just processing everything that you have done today. Yeah.
Okay, I'll push the code to GitHub like right after the session. You guys can go through it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just a comment or to add something.
Mm-hmm.
For the just resetting the form, I guess there's another JavaScript method basically made for for a form component, not component actually, but a form element.
Mm-hmm.
So it's reset method. So just like you've got the form from the div, let's say form element, form element, then just what you just need to do is like add a dot reset method in front of it.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
Sijui kama umenipata.
Here now. And nimekuelewa. So we need to get the form element and then have a set method, ama how do you? Is it a method?
Yeah, it's a method.
Okay, so we need to get the form, which is this thing here, sindio?
Yeah.
And then pass it there, and then a dot reset.
Yeah.
Let's comment this out first and see. It's a method.
Okay, use the brackets. It has the brackets.
Bracket.
As in, come on, invoke.
Parentheses.
As in something like reset, then brackets at the end, the two brackets.
Oh,
yeah.
It's invoking it.
Yeah, invoking it.
Or you mean now we call the function?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I did not know that. I didn't know there was a reset method. That's an easy implementation. Okay, I've learned something new. Thank you. But I'll still keep this here just in case someone wants to see it. It's really a better implementation. Anyone else? Mambo, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm totally fine. I'm just waiting for that code so that I can go through it pole.
Right. So whatever is left, like the deleting, because we need to be able to delete the books and persisting the data in the UI so that when you refresh, haipotei kwa UI. We will do it tomorrow. We'll use local storage. So we'll go through that tomorrow. But I'll push this code just now once we are done, so we can go through it. Okay. All right. So today we've extended a bit, but it was a lot of code, a lot to consume. So I'll give you guys some time to go through it. Then Sakesho, when you finish up, you can have like the whole weekend to go through the code pole. You can even improve it if you want. Come on, kuna mali we've done some redundancy. You can improve it. But I started, the reason ilianza hivi, like very simple code. If it's repetitive, ni ndio muelewe what is going on step by step. And then now you can optimize afterwards. So, okay. Right, so let me start presenting. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you very much for attending today. And tutaonana kesho 5:15 to finish up the project. Bye-bye.